We'll go ahead and get started then. Welcome to the Tempe City Council Work Study Session virtual meeting for Thursday, April 22nd. The time is now 4:02 p.m. and due to concerns over COVID-19 exposure, the city has implemented measures to protect our community, including the closing of council chambers and limiting public attendance to electronic means only. Members of the public may view the live meeting proceedings on Tempe Channel 11 or attend the meeting virtually through Cisco WebEx events by visiting tempe.gov/clerk for more information. The first item of the agenda is the call to the audience for issue review session items. Audience members will have up to 3 minutes to address the City Council. Madam Clerk, do we receive any speaker or comment cards?
Mayor, we did receive a request to speak from Kendon Young, who I don't quite see yet, but I have 2 cards I can read into the record while we wait for Kendon.
That sounds good. Let's do that.
All right. First card comes from David Sokolowski. He's writing reference item 2B. David writes, Sustainability Department is asking for money to support electric vehicle adoption. It says, quote, current projections are showing a high likelihood of over 99 days a summer. 16 is the historical normal, over 105 degrees if we do not severely reduce carbon emissions by 2030. In order for the City of Tempe to continue to have a high-functioning climate action and sustainability program, it is necessary to have roadmaps for critical infrastructure investments to enact climate action in Tempe, unquote. He continues, that critical infrastructure is bus stop shelters and transit improvements. Riders like myself need protection from the sun and extreme heat. Think about the difference between improving a single parking lot to demonstrate sustainability with electric vehicles and a bus stop shelter that improves transit for an entire community. Bus stop shelters are an equitable investment that can benefit anyone, even if they ride the free orbit, and electric vehicles out of reach for people who rent, work minimum wage, and have a low credit score. Even if the department measures carbon reductions, I feel pretty confident that transit investment will prove much more effective at reducing emissions than electric vehicles. The Transportation Commission works to reduce congestion and improve public safety through reducing vehicle miles traveled. Improving the range of electric vehicles conflicts with those goals and will induce congestion. Even though electric vehicles do not emit tailpipe pollution, they contribute to commute times and can compound tailpipe pollution from other vehicles. And next item comes from Mr. David Rice, and he writes regarding item 2C, the Parks Master Plan. He writes, the city wants parks and recreation facilities to be more accessible. In some ways, we are doing that, like building inclusive playgrounds, but in many ways, we are doing the exact opposite. In 1980, Tempe parks with lights were required to be open until midnight, but today the city is pushing to close our parks at 10 p.m. instead. What was so different in the 80s? Did we stay up later? Were summers hotter in the 80s where people needed to enjoy parks at 10 and 11 o'clock? Whereas today that's no longer required? Were residents more tolerant in the 80s? I'm not sure, but the city is pushing to close parks at 10 p.m. instead of 12 a.m., ignoring public input. Of the multiple individual park surveys that the city has done, roughly 1 resident wants to keep park closing times at 12 a.m. for every 2 residents that want parks to close at 10 p.m. Considering the varied interest and desires of park users, 33% is a huge number of residents that want the ability to do something. Yet in a vast majority of park closure decisions, the city has disregarded the wishes of those 33% of the residents and restricted park hours. Doing this does not make parks more accessible. Sometimes when you are 7 and age 70, having convenient access to a restroom makes a park facility more usable than if restrooms were not present. The Park Master Plan Focus Group highlighted the desire to add restrooms to all parks. The Park Master Plan Focus Group stated fields should be well lit and have bathroom access. 49% of survey respondents feel parks need more bathrooms. 28% of survey respondents said the lack of bathrooms limited their use of parks. However, after this overwhelming input, the city is proposing to spend $0 over 30 years to expand restroom access. Not providing bathrooms limits the usability of the other great facilities at our city parks. The master plan requires that city parks categorized as community parks have bathrooms. Please ensure that parks that receive the level of amenities to be considered a community park also have a bathroom. A community park without a bathroom is just an overinvested neighborhood park. Please err on the side of inclusivity and access when making operational investment decisions. And he closes by saying, also please add an appendix to the master plan document that explains how facility level of service recommendations were decided upon. Without reasoning or data, the level of service recommendations have no foundation and are hard to explain or defend. Thank you for your consideration. And that's it for the cards to read. And I don't know if we see Kendon yet or not.
We do not see Kendon.
Okay. No worries. Well, we have a separate second call to the audience for item number 3. So if he comes on the call later, we can get him in then. But for now, thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Next up, we have item number 2A. Those are issue review session items. The Tempe Community Council's Human Services Funding Agency Review 2021-2022 Community Recommendations. And I'm going to call on either Naomi Farrell or Octavia Harris.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Octavia Harris, and I am the Executive Director of Tempe Community Council and Deputy Human Services Director. And today here with me is Kim Vandenwiggen, the Community Impact Manager for Tempe Community Council, TCC, as well as Brandon Wiley, who is a past board president, and he is also the chair of the Community Impact Committee, which oversees the agency review process. And Brandon is also in his 6th and final year on the TCC board. Additionally, we have Nancy Blevins, who is currently the Secretary of the Tempe Community Council Board. Nancy is in her 3rd year on the board, and she's the incoming chair of the Community Impact Committee as well. Next slide, please.
Hello, Mayor and Council. I'm Kim Vandenwiggen, Community Impact Manager, Tempe Community Council. The Tempe Community Council partners with the City of Tempe to connect community members in need with community members who care. And then this year, like no other, those in need and those who care sometimes switched roles. Those who once volunteered needed assistance, and those who aided sometimes needed the help themselves. The nonprofit sector during this exceptionally unusual and challenging year, like so much of American life, has been upended. These community nonprofit partners were providing everything from food and shelter to legal, medical, mental health services, education, and employment support. Yet at a time when our community needed these services the most, donations and other earned revenue sources continued to decline as demand continued and still continues to grow. Crucial spring fundraisers were canceled or moved to less lucrative online venues, and many donors and volunteers were stretched in many directions, preoccupied with their own problems and unable to volunteer or contribute as they once had. The City of Tempe is a community that cares about these social service providers, which is evident through the generous financial support of human services and the community-centric approach to funding services and programs known as the agency review process. While these partner agencies have been stepping up to the challenges this year, volunteers, the lifeblood of many nonprofit organizations, have also been leading the way by stepping up to help their neighbors and the community during this pandemic. Tempe community volunteers have stepped up in a big way this year, both for agency partners and also for Tempe Community Council. Over 100 volunteers were trained to participate in the AR process this year. These volunteers dedicated over 2,100 hours over a 4-month period to participate in a survey, read and evaluate grant proposals, interview agencies, and to make funding recommendations that we're presenting to you today. After this stage of the process, many will attend site visits, roundtables, and will volunteer to serve on the TCC board committees. The citizen involvement in agency review not only removes the politics from the process, but it brings citizens together to become better informed about the struggles and strengths nonprofit agencies face to fund, create, and implement quality programs. We're very grateful to have the community partnerships with these contracted agencies, the support of Tempe Community Agency Review volunteers and citizens, and the Tempe Community Council Board, Mayor, and Council. The work of agency review directly supports the Tempe City Council Strategic Priority 3.10. And now Nancy will share some details about this year's process. Nancy?
Thank you, Kim. I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a reminder on our process. As you know, this is a highly public community dependent process. It's rigorous, it takes a lot of time, and we pride ourselves in the transparency of the processes as well. And that's what this process brings us to our recommendation for you today. As Kim mentioned, we had 100 volunteers trained in this process, which we think is an all-time high. And we had 51 programs, which is 3 new ones from last year, applied. That was from 42 different agencies. But one of the more remarkable things about the level of participation, both from the agencies and the volunteers, was the volunteers' cross-section representation of our community. We were remarkably proud of the fact that we had professionals from for-profit businesses, business owners, nonprofit organizations and agencies, public school administrators, City of Tempe staff, ASU representation, pastors, other faith leaders, and retired professionals, mental health professionals, grant management professionals, and we were thrilled to get an ASU student volunteer for us this year. These programs, there were more than we've had in the past, and we're very proud to bring a recommendation that you can see. I'm sorry, I should have asked you to go to the next slide. I got excited.
I'm sorry, the slides aren't advancing. Alex, can you assist in any way? They're literally not moving
Yes.
forward for me.
Stand by. Give me 1 sec.
Thank you.
Well, after a year of Zoom, these moments are even less awkward than they were.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm not
No
sure if
problem.
it's the bandwidth.
You know, the joys of technology, as we always talk about. It's always great when it totally works. But you know, at the same time, I figured I might as well come back on and talk about this with you for a little bit. Let's see here. So, okay, so I see Alex has the slideshow reloaded here. And let's see if it advances beyond the next one.
That's perfect. And
Perfect.
I'm going to need another advancement in just a second. Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Mayor.
No,
Awesome.
not a problem. So this one good,
did you have
Nancy,
a question?
budgeting comparison?
Yes, this is correct.
Perfect.
We
I'll
were just
turn it
mentioning-
back over to you.
Thank you, sir. We mentioned the 100 volunteers and the 40 agencies that we are going to recommend, representing 49 separate programs. And again, that's 3 extra new programs that are in there for this year. And now I'm ready for that next slide unless there's a question. Okay, just as a reminder, we like to have information, and we like our volunteers to have information. And one of the greatest tools we have to get that information was our 2021 Human Services Survey. This really targets these 6 target populations to find out what do they need, what's the most important, how do we prioritize our populations, knowing that this is not a clean 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You're in one of these categories and that's it. They often have overlap, as you all well know. And so having the survey really dig even a little deeper about this information, we can prioritize them, and they are listed 1 through 6 on your screen here in order. Homeless individuals and families, working poor, children and youth, sexual and domestic violence survivors, individuals with disabilities, and older adults. I'm sure that none of this comes as a surprise to you all. But another thing that's really important, and I'm ready for the next slide if possible, is to also, within those 6 populations, find out what the top human services issues are. This really helps us get down to our agency review process to find out where do we need to put some extra priority in this particular year. And the pandemic has had a big, big impact on that, as I'm sure you all realize. So we had another record response on this from the community. 693 people named their top 5 human services issues. And those are, and you can see them on your screen, food insecurity and hunger, housing, healthcare, mental health crisis, and older adults who are living without a support system. So that was what goes into, that's another factor that goes into this progress, and another way which we involve the community by allowing them to respond to the survey and express their specific concerns. And I'm ready for the next slide now. So what we did was we had these 100 volunteers pre-screen the applications and the financial review, which is a big job, but it's an important job, and they took it very seriously. So the score that they gave on that application and financial review comprises 50% of the ultimate score, which you will be seeing that final score later. So if you did perfect on your application and your financial review, you got 50 points going into the interview. So then we take into account the interview score, and the interview was, again, these 100 amazing volunteers who didn't get in a room this year. We got on Zoom, but we made it work. And so the interview score that you got was turned into a maximum of 40 points that you could get. So if you were perfect on the application, perfect on the interview, you're at 90% right now. And so then we take that extra 10%, which is basically a magical math formula that helps us figure out where they hit on the population, the 6 populations, and the 5 top human services needs. That gives you an extra 10 points. And so you get to your final score there with 100 of that. So to talk about math and some more magical stuff that has gone on behind the scenes and with our volunteers, Brandon's going to walk us through some of those numbers.
Awesome. Thanks, Nancy.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question about the slide.
Yes, go ahead, Councilmember Cubie.
Sorry, I have my hand up. Yeah, I have a question about the 10% of final score. So if it's a max of 10 points, how do those distribute amongst those categories? Like, are they very close together?
I am not certain of that. Brandon or Kim, can you answer that specific algorithm that's used in the spreadsheet?
Yeah, could you maybe just, if you could just repeat the question?
So yeah, that relates to the previous slide and how the areas are ranked, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is it a real differentiator, this part of it, or are they max 10 points? Is there a real divide where it could be 0 or 10, or do they kind of fall into a median range?
So the range is actually split between 5 and 10. So there's nobody at the, on either end of, so like youth programs, for example, comes in at 5 points, where people experiencing homelessness comes in at 10. So you do see, I mean, it doesn't have an impact on the total score, but it's only 10% of that total score. So that 1 point difference really ends up being relatively small, and the overall scores were all pretty gradated, between the different agencies and programs. And you have some, homeless programs that fall lower in score, even though they have a higher, human services survey score than one that has a senior program, for example, that maybe just performed better in the interview and in the overall application.
Sure. So thank you. I understand. Thank you so much. You
Cool.
answered my question perfectly. Thank you.
All right, so yeah, we can go to the next slide. Cool. So this is obviously a very human process, and we'd want to fund every program that applies, and but ultimately we're bound by the dollars that we have available. We're also aware that the need for these services is always greater than the funds available, but regardless, we're extremely grateful that the City of Tempe provides the support that they do to the human services work. And this year, as you can see here, the amounts available come from multiple sources. So the City of Tempe General Fund, the display panel, and the Together Tempe partnership with the City of Tempe water bill, as well as then TCC's contributions directly through the Together Tempe program that's a part of the Tempe Community Council, for a total of $1,110,756. And there's a difference between the requested amount and the actual funded amount of $888,200. We can go to the next slide. So this slide just shows a funding comparison between fiscal year 1920 through the proposed 2022. So you can see some of the differences as funds have shifted and changed a little bit around, primarily in the City of Tempe water bill. You see a slight decline over the following years. You also see, and primarily the big decline for the display panel is really just the fact that we're in COVID and the pandemic, and there's less eyeballs on the display panel, so generates less ad revenue. And then the contribution from Together Tempe from TCC, that's variable year over year depending on how fundraising efforts performed, and so you see a slight decline as well in that number, but certainly higher than it was in fiscal year 1920. And go to the next slide. Thank you. So the scoring criteria includes the application score and the interview grade and the prioritization score assigned by the results of the community survey. So that's their actual score that we start with. And then the formula that we've used in order to adjust the allocations, we take the grading and scoring and weight the grading and scoring based on the application score, and the financial scores are weighted together and added together. We then convert that interview grade to a score, and then we use the human service survey that was conducted as part of the TCC community needs assessment, and we merge those results from the stakeholders to get one list of priorities in order from least to critical, as we've described. So what we then did is took that final weighted score, and those scoring 75 or below were not recommended for funding, and there were 2 agencies that fell below, and 2 programs specifically that fell below that score. Then final scores were converted to a percentage. So we then multiply that percentage by the recommended funding amount. So, for example, if they, as it says there, an example becomes if they got a 92.4%, the recommended funding amount was, let's say, $100,000, then they would, then the amount that would come out of it would be $92,400, right? So just a direct application, that 92.4% score against their funding amount. So that's the next step. We then took those scoring greater than 95 and said no additional reduction is going to be made. We said, look, if there's agencies that are really at the top tier, programs that are the top tier, they performed well across the board, they fit within the community survey in a level that puts them above 95, we're not going to do an additional reduction in order to smooth them out. So then the last step that we took was we scored anything between 95% and 75%, so both ends. We just applied a smoothing calculation for the remaining funds. And so we just said, hey, look, we have to, in order to meet the needs or to meet the funding amount that we have, we've got to reduce everybody by another percentage amount beyond their final score and their weighted funding amount. And so that's how we got it. If we go to the next slide, we'll talk about how it was broken down across the categories. So this is the funding breakdown by category, and you can see the crisis category is still receiving the most funding, but it's also good to see the self-sufficiency programs increasing. This includes efforts like prevention, and they're all getting well represented. And so obviously it'll be a great day when we can get funding for stability and self-sufficiency to grow, because crisis funding is maybe no longer as acutely needed as it is today. So that would obviously be the desire, is to see those numbers grow and the crisis number decline over time, just given the fact that there's less of a need for those things. All right, and so every year we're trying to make improvements across our, across the process. So this year we had a couple of things that the Agency Review Community Impact Committee acted on this year. So first one was we prioritized to achieve collective impact. We analyzed the need, the impacts, and compared it to the funding amount requested. And we're currently working with ASU to assist us in evaluating the agency review process, procedures, and design for collective impact funding opportunities. We also successfully increased our efforts to engage more community members to volunteer in this funding process, with an emphasis on improving participation from younger people as well as people of color. We refined the application questions for improved scoring and uncovered how agencies are approaching services through a lens of equity. We also moved towards the creation of standardized outcome measures in the area of ending homelessness. Programs were monitored quarterly through reporting and virtual site visits. We got a number of improvements we made. Through a number of site visits, and we collaborated with city human service departments to hold roundtables that provided agencies the opportunity to learn about each other's work, to share ideas for collaboration, and then also discuss best practices and program innovations. And then lastly, we improved contract performance outcomes and indicators, and we provided additional technical assistance and worked with agencies to refine their performance measurements or tools over the course of the year. So let me go to the next slide. So we're always looking for ways to improve, as I mentioned, and so these are a few areas that we're going to look to address this upcoming year. First is to refine and improve contract performance measures and indicators, so just continually make improvements on that front. We also want to get better at prioritizing our need. Largely, this is through the extensive community needs assessment that we're currently contracting with a consultant to assist us with. This will further assist us in aligning the agency review funding with the city's strategic plan as well. We're also exploring how agencies can collect data that assists in improving the analysis of community need, as well as forecasting trends or helping to better prioritize resource allocation. And then always we're improving and refining the contract performance outcomes and indicators that are meaningful and impactful for the people they are meant to serve. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Kim, or maybe Octavia, I believe.
Yes, that's correct. Thanks so much, Brandon. Appreciate that. So in closing, just once again, want to recognize our volunteers. They are really invaluable to this process. So thank you to everyone who might be watching from home. I really appreciate you, especially our board members. This process really works because the volunteers contribute their time, talents, and experience. And I'd also like to acknowledge Brandon Wiley for his exceptional service to our community through his dedicated work on this funding process and his last 6 years serving on the board of Tempe Community Council. We're definitely going to miss him as he concludes his time, but we're looking forward to having him as a community volunteer. Additionally, one thing that I would like to address is when we talked about the funding amounts that are available for this upcoming fiscal year, just want to let council know that there is going to be a supplemental that Human Services is putting forth that includes $450,000 for of one-time funding for congregational shelter in Tempe, and in addition to the $450,000 specifically for shelter to address homelessness within Tempe, also $71,445 because of the reduced direct donations to the display panel, as well as the Together Tempe water bill donations. And this would be more addressed when the budget session comes up by Kim Jones. But if council were to approve that supplemental, then we would provide council with an update on how we would actually conduct that process. It would be run very similarly to agency review, where there would be a competitive process. And again, these are one-time funds. And so if council were to approve that supplement, then it would be part of our update when we provide it to council next fiscal year. And so at this time, we'd be happy to respond to any questions mayor or council has.
Great. Thank you very much. Council, any comments or questions? Councilmember Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Brandon, Octavia, and Kim, for all your work. Having served on agency review, I know what a rigorous process it is, and it's only gotten more rigorous as time has gone on. So I appreciate that you're always striving for excellence. And I had a quick question about the display panel. It dropped 54%, and delighted to hear that we're proposing to make it hold it harmless, but why did it drop in revenues?
I think the main reason, and we don't directly control the display panel, so it's just a contracted agreement that we have. So can't say specifically, but the presumed reason is just less eyeballs on it due to COVID and just due to, just people not seeing it as frequently.
Oh, I see. Okay. And then I also had a question, maybe for Octavia, I'm not sure, and likely can't be answered now, but could we hear maybe in the future, or maybe in a Friday packet, is there a potential for using the Tempe Community Council reserve to increase funding this year? I know there's so many needs. We have COVID relief coming in. We have, there's so much need in the community. And I wonder if that's ever a potential that's looked at, whether the reserve fund could be, I won't say drawn down, that sounds so dramatic, but whether there could be contributions from the reserve fund, if that's been considered or could be considered.
So yes, would definitely be happy to address that in a Friday packet. I will say that last year, the Tempe Community Council did draw some of the interest from that reserve fund because it's all actually invested. It's not liquid. And so did invest some of that reserve fund into the Together Tempe process. And the board will definitely is looking towards having those conversations on strategically contributing to the Together Tempe fund.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing more. And thank you to the nearly 100 volunteers. This is, connecting those who need with those who cares. It's not just TCC's mantra, but it's our city's mantra. And I so appreciate all the hard work that's gone on into this thorough analysis of the human service needs and how outside agencies can help us, because it takes a lot of different hands on deck, not just the city. And we all know, and so for the people watching at home, we all know that this is just a fraction of what the city contributes to our human services budget and direct assistance to our residents. But it's an important part because we're still, I guess, the only citizen-based human services advisory board left in the state of Arizona. And that's something we should really be proud of. So thank you for leading all of that, Octavia and Kim and Brandon and all the TCC board. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Cubie. Next up, we have Vice Mayor Keating.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to take a second to thank TCC and board members and all the volunteers that put in countless hours with the agency review process, which I agree with Councilmember Cubie is example to be held up as far as a positive process, one that removes politics from these sort of decisions. And I think it's a very important piece of Tempe. So thank you for your efforts here. I really appreciate the effort you put in and the time, and I'm very pleased with your recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Keating. Next up, Councilmember Arredondo Savage.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I don't want to say what my council member already said, but I certainly do agree. I love seeing that long list of volunteers and certainly do appreciate their time, but also for those individuals and businesses and nonprofits that took the time to fill out the survey. I mean, that's how we really find out what's happening on the ground, and I certainly do appreciate them doing that. And Brandon, I just want to say you always do a really phenomenal job. So thank you so much for your work and your leadership. It's just been really great to see the evolution. And also, I just really wanted to make a comment on your goals, the upcoming goals for the following year. And I love the fact that we're going to work on some alignment with our strategic priorities in the city of Tempe. And, we've really made that a priority for us to ensure that we are holding ourselves accountable as we try to make impacts on different things and goals and objectives. So I love the idea that we'll be able to work together and really even make greater strides. So again, just like my council colleague said, just thank you to everybody for your work, the board, the volunteers, Octavia for you and your connections. Thank you so much for that. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Arredondo Savage. Next up, Councilmember Garland.
Hi, thank you, Mayor. I just want to say I was so impressed with reading through the packet of information that you sent, all the details in there. I loved how it was separated so that I could look at each one of the organizations and some of the information that you had presented there, and the notes and the comments and all of that. So I just think it was a really well done package. I just want to thank the board, and I want to thank all the volunteers that went into this agency review process. I think it's incredible what you do. And you're doing everything you can to help make our city better. And I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Garland. Next up, Councilmember Navarro.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. A lot of it's been said. Octavia and gang, so to speak. This is obviously one of the things that Tempe is so proud of in the process that we use, and I think a lot of us have been in that process, handing out and evaluating all the people that are coming through, asking for those resources that we provide for them. So it's just an outstanding job that you guys do and how we continue on doing it. And thank you, really, truly thank you. I know this is a lot of hard work and stuff, and I witnessed it many of times. So outstanding.
Excellent. Thank you, Councilmember Navarro. And I'll just go ahead and wrap up then and just say, once again, thank you very much to Tempe Community Council. Thank you to Octavia and Nancy, all of the Tempe Community Council volunteers, all the names that were on that list, and to my good friend Brandon Wiley for all the exceptional work you do, not only for TCC, but on behalf of our entire community. We deeply appreciate you and just thank you for all your efforts. And with that said, unless there's anything else, we'll wrap up. Brandon, Octavia, Nancy, anything to leave us with?
No, thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. All right, next up is item 2B, which is the fiscal year 2021-22 budget review session. And I'm going to go ahead and call upon our Deputy City Manager, Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Ken Jones.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm Ken Jones, Deputy City Manager, and tonight we're going to, with Mark Day and Rosa Enchowski, I'm going to present to you the recommended City Manager's budget. We have reached this point with a lot of work, and I just want to remind you how well this has worked. The City Council has been given a lot of information that we've derived from our taxpayers, and the City Council has used that to establish priorities and give us their feedback on what they want to see in the budget this year. We've worked really diligently with you on the CIP, and I believe the capital program has made tremendous progress based on the input that you've given. Tonight, you're going to see that capital program included with the operating budget and how the city manager recommends that the funds be spent. Again, this is based a lot on the input that we got from the City Council, and then our departments have done a tremendous job of taking the recommendations from the City Council on what they want the outcome to be and operationalizing that and coming back with recommended budgets to address those concerns. So this is working really well. I just want to congratulate you on the great input that we've gotten from you and how that has led to a very successful budget process. So Mark Day and his very slim staff, Lori Vickers and Benicia Benson, have put this packet together for you tonight. And as usual, it's a very packed packet. There is a lot of information in here. So you'll see in your packet that we have recommended budgets by fund. We also have comparisons of each department's recommended budget to this year's adjusted budget. You'll recall that after last year's budget approval, we came in and adjusted those budgets down. So we thought it made sense to show you what those adjusted budget amounts are compared to what we're recommending for next year. So that's in your budget. You also see the percentage changes that are recommended, both the supplemental increases and the natural economic increases like pension funds and health insurance and things like that occur. So you will see that those are all included. You also see another summary of the capital program that we have seen a couple of times. And then you will see something that we haven't had in a packet yet for both you and the public to peruse, and that is a complete listing of all of the supplemental budget requests that the department's made, and they're prioritized, and you'll see them in green as recommended funding for the departments, and in red, the not recommended funding. There are a lot of those, and each of those, thank you, Benicia, are linkable. So when you click on the title, it will take you to a detailed description of each of those. Now, the detailed descriptions fill out your packet. There's a lot of information there, but you don't have to scroll through those. You can just click on the title and you'll get to those. And so before I turn this over to Mark, who's going to walk you through the budget, and then Rosa, who will go through the process of telling you how the departments are recommending operating budget improvements to address the concerns that you've brought up, much like she did with the capital program, I just want to address a couple things that you'll see tonight. First, I'll start with the presentation you just saw from TCC. As Octavia said, we have $450,000 as a recommended supplemental budget increase for TCC to address congregate shelters. And we also have the $71,445 to make them whole on the contributions that didn't come in from the display panels and also from the water users making contributions, our water customers. The staff will be coming back to you, I believe, because this is one of those examples of why we don't recommend that you link a particular revenue source to a particular expenditure. In this case, it is actually an inverse relationship. When the economy's down and people are spending less money on advertising, we have less money going to the programs that actually need the funding. So what staff, I believe, will come back to you with is a proposal. Instead of that average $90,000 that goes up and down in display panel revenue, that we just build an additional $100,000 in the TCC contribution each year. So instead of $1 million, we just make it 1.1 million and get rid of this terrible inverse relationship where we're funding them less when they need it the most. The only other thing I want to mention to you before I turn this over to Mark is that there's one mistake in the supplemental budget recommendations. We had previously been given very clear direction by the city council. We went back 2 years and looked at the council meeting and what was told. And the city council said, we want you to fund the adaptive recreation program recommended in the budget. At that time, we only had one-time funding to dedicate to that, to non-recurring funding. And we said, we will make it recurring in future years. That should be this year, and we failed to do that. So we will make that right, and you will see that there's an item as a supplemental in the red for recurring funding for that expansion of adaptive rec, which has already taken place. This would be merely a continuation of those programs by the community services and human services folks. So those are the two things I wanted to point out, and then I'll hand it over to Mark Day to start going through the budget process. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Mark Day, Municipal Budget Director. Before I get started, I'd also like to acknowledge the rest of the budget staff, Lori Vickers and Benicia Benson, for all their hard work this year in putting together the budget. So although both the operating capital budgets address various city council priorities and performance measure, the presentation tonight of the operating and capital budget and the public budget development process aligns with council priorities, strong community connections, and performance measure 2.11. As I just mentioned, we do have a very public process when we develop our budget. As you can see, we've had quite a few meetings, and now we're up to April 22nd, the budget review session with the city managers recommended both operating and capital budget. You will see that on May 6th, we have a placeholder at the work study session. If there's any follow-up items from tonight, we can definitely address those on May 6th. And then we enter the more formal adoption process that's outlined in statute, and that includes tentative adoption on May 27th, followed by final adoption on June 10th, and then the final action that you'll take is on June 24th with the adoption of the property tax levy. So the recommended operating budget for next year, fiscal year 21-22, is $562.4 million. That's approximately 4% higher than the current fiscal year budget, or 20.2 million. This represents the maximum amount that can be spent next fiscal year. So we can make changes based on your feedback today and definitely on May 6th. But once the amount is set at tentative adoption, we can't increase the budget. As Ken mentioned, the budget includes provisions for salary step and benefit increases as outlined in the multi-year MOUs, retirement system contributions and other post-employment benefits, increases in fees and services such as electricity, fuel, software maintenance costs. We've also included contingency amounts for emergencies in each of the major funds. We also added contingency in CDBG and Section 8 for potential additional federal funding that may be received next fiscal year. The supplemental budget and CIP operating impacts increases total $23.3 million across all the funds. that are offset by 2.7 million in new revenue or expenditure offset. And this operating budget is consistent with the long-range forecast and budget strategies that we presented to you in February. So this slide highlights the adopted budget for 2021 compared to the recommended budget for 21-22 for each of the city's major operating fund. So these amounts represent expenditures. So I'm just going to go through some of the highlights of the major changes. So for the general fund, the increase includes 18.1 million in supplementals with 1.7 million in offsets, with a net increase of 17.1 million. The increase in water, the 1.3 million that you see there, includes increased bond debt payments and 400,000 in recommended supplementals. For the solid waste fund, the increase includes 650,000 in supplementals and roll forward budget appropriation from the current year that we need to roll forward to next year for some equipment purchases where the equipment has been ordered but won't be received till next year. The transit fund, I need to explain this a little bit. So the decrease in the transit fund expenditures represent the recognition of the shared revenue credits from Valley Metro. So we receive various revenue credits from Valley Metro, whether that's federal funding, shared the county tax, or fare revenue. We used to recognize that as revenue, but now we're going to recognize it as a credit to expenses. And then lastly here, the increase in the transportation or HER fund includes 1.4 million in supplementals. Now we'll move over to the capital budget. So the proposed FY 21-22 capital budget is $329.5 million. That's 94.1 million higher than the current adopted budget. So although we as you remember at the CIP public meetings at work study session, we went over a 5-year CIP. We only adopt the first year of the CIP 21-22 as part of the budget process. So that's what these numbers represent here. So some highlights from the adopted capital budget in the current year compared to the recommended budget for 21-22. So most of these increases and decreases you see are due to changes in the reappropriation amounts from one budget year to the next. And this is primarily due to timing of projects. So they may proceed faster or slower than we anticipated. We may have some delay in funding that moves the project out from one year to the next. And some of the increases are just due to increase in project costs or planned projects in 21-22. So I'm just going to highlight a few of these. So the increase in the arts and cultural capital program includes anticipated costs associated with the repair of the TCA roof. The transit fund reduction represents a planned reduction in capital project or pay-as-you-go funding. And the increases in transportation include increased funding for street maintenance projects. And then the largest increase you see there, general purpose, that includes funding for construction of Fire Station 2, permanent supportive housing, and overall increases in funding for parks and facilities maintenance or maintenance of our buildings. Now I'll turn it back over to Ken.
Thank you, Mark. So the general fund, as we said, the recommended budget supplementals are listed in your packet. There's no reason to go over the numbers in detail here. The amounts that were requested versus what is proposed for funding is also in your packet. Next slide. And then Rosa is going to talk to you about how these proposed supplementals address the priorities that you've identified. So I'll turn it over to Rosa from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Good evening, everyone. Rosa Inchowski, Director of Strategic Management and Diversity. And as we presented with the capital improvement budget presentation on March 18th, today we will like to present the acceleration models specifically pertaining to the operating budget. Next slide. Since 2016, we've been working on performance-led budgeting. As you know, we are a very proud data-driven organization that has focused with this organization huge lift with all our departments looking at how do we allocate resources with clear outcomes. And if we shift resources, making sure that we understand what resources we are shifting based on outcomes we are trying to achieve. There's been a lot of collaboration from our city departments working together to stretch every dollar for our constituents. Next slide. The acceleration model is a model that basically we developed in-house just for the constituents who are viewing tonight. And it's a way for us to, with many priorities that the city has, understanding what the constituents want through the community survey and our business survey. And that data is shared with the mayor and council, and then through your review of that data, you identify specific areas that you would like to see prioritized in the coming budget cycle. You identified early in December 10 areas that you would like to see accelerated. And as with the CIP tonight, we would like to focus only on the operating acceleration models. Each of the performance measures have a proposed language also that has been updated to include equity language, which is the new initiative this year with our departments. What you see before you, the one in orange, pavement quality index, will not be reviewed since they do not have an operating budget. And the subsidized housing funded usage does not also have an operating budget, so we will not review that. HUD does not like to commingle funds, so that specifically will not be an operating fund allocation. Next slide. Since this presentation took place on March 18th, reviewing all the acceleration models, I would only like to perhaps, in the interest of time with you, just share high level some of the acceleration strategies that are feeding into the proposed operating budget supplemental request. The police trust score is one of the areas that the council asked us to review. In working with our police department, and we know that we have an annual community survey through ETC Institute that our community and residents participate in along with our business survey. What you see before you specifically is a different survey. It's a monthly sentiment survey that our police department has contracted. About 300 to 500 residents or participants give feedback as far as how they are trusting our police department. Most importantly, some of the acceleration strategies our current chief and his command staff are working on is shifting from a zone to a beat level data. So when we think about our community, we're thinking about how our police department and our officers are connecting directly in the neighborhoods with the residents. Some of the acceleration strategies that you would like to know about is that they are shifting to that model, which is something that we have learned and been asked for by our residents. The other thing through the Public Safety Task Force and other feedback from our community is understanding that they have liked, and we know that we need to create greater transparency through public data and dashboards to communicate police department activities. So one of the heaviest lift is a data inventory and moving forward with data transparency. There are other strategic acceleration strategies, but as I said, I will only highlight a few that are being recommended for the operating budget. The operating budget supplemental request that is being approved and recommended, or at least recommended to all of you, hopefully approved, is about $1.4 million for a police technology technician to basically handle the dashboard or the data transparency piece. And then the Homeless Park Safety Initiative is really focused on the G4S, which the lion's share of that has been human services. This is one portion, and that is a collaboration between the Community Services Department, Human Services, and our police department. Next slide. The sentiment survey that I mentioned is conducted monthly. And one of the things that we are looking at with all our performance measures, but what you're seeing is an initiative to look at not only what is the average sentiment of our community, but more importantly, what we do know nationally and locally is the importance of understanding specifically what segments of our community are either feeling greater trust or less trust. That hones into the data and identifies the specific areas of gap for our police chief and his staff to focus on. So what you see before you is the police trust score with a target of 80, the green line above, and then the monthly sentiment surveys based on the different demographics. We would like to share with you that specifically a Lucid company that conducts these surveys initially wasn't looking at the different demographics, and we have actually leaned in and asked them to disaggregate the data in order for us to understand the different demographics. The other category I know is fairly large, and we are also asking them to look at the data specifically, whether it's biracial or other categories, in order for us to focus on those different categories as well. Next slide. Ending homelessness. We know that this is a very important issue for our community and our business community. So one of the areas that we have discussed is making sure that if someone's experiencing homelessness, that it's rare, brief, and one time. So some of the strategies in the next slide is looking at increasing the G4S park security, or at least the HOPE team working with our park security and making sure that we are reaching the people who are experiencing homelessness and helping them find shelter. The continued utilization of motel rooms, instead of June 2021, we are extending that, or proposing to extend that to June 2022, and increasing the funding from the TCC agency review for expansion of the congregate shelter options. As you saw the presentation from TCAA, and as was mentioned, that is one funding source, but there are also companion pieces such as this that also add to fulfilling some of the needs of our community. Next slide. Tree coverage. Achieving a citywide 25% tree and shade canopy across all demographics categories by 2040. And that is specifically looking at, for example, that equity language that we are adding to this performance measures and others. This is a great example of making sure that as we grow our tree canopy for walkability in our city, that it doesn't take place in the most affluent areas first, and then others, but really making sure that we have an equity overlay and making sure that it's equitable as we grow our tree canopy. That is very important for the livability and the quality of life for our community. So some of the acceleration strategies in working with our arborist is making sure that it increases the staff, and as operating, it's increasing the staff of a team of 5 FTEs to maintain the equipment and focus on the planting for our city, and that's $752,000. This also was one of the bundled performance measures that we have with our CIP. In other words, if we are purchasing the trees, we need the operating funds to make sure that we are planting the trees and maintaining them. What you see before you is the acceleration target date of 2040. And we call that an acceleration target rate, but our arborist clearly states that we really can't accelerate our tree canopy. In other words, we need to slowly grow our trees, understand when the tree canopy grows, but more importantly, the most important part of that is maintaining our trees. Next slide. The carbon neutrality. So we have a community carbon neutrality goal and a carbon neutrality goal within our municipal operations. And looking at those, we understand, and working with Dr. Braden Kay and working with other city departments, is the acceleration strategies that best fits right now, and looking at the adoption of this performance measure and moving forward is the solar and battery investments, both in our community and in our city operations for our utilities, and then looking at EV charging stations throughout our city, and partnering and making sure that as we build a master plan for where the locations are for EV charging, that we understand that they are shared not only for our city operations, but the community. We are also building energy savings by investing now in some of the equipment that we are purchasing that reduces our carbon footprint. Next slide. So as we look at the operating budget that complements the CIP, some of the strategies in moving forward, or at least that are recommended for the operating, is building the support for Dr. Braden Kay in the Sustainability Office through a Community Resilience Fellow. What I just mentioned, the Community Electric Vehicle Roadmap, which is very important in identifying what is the best placement for this investment of an asset in our community. A Climate Action Manager and operating budget for that, And then one of the things that Sustainability Office has done very well is building relationships with other departments, as we know that this is a heavy lift. It takes all departments working through to this. The Green Building Program Sustainability Specialist is through the Community Development Office, but it adds to reducing basically the carbon footprint for our city. And that total is about $250,000 in our operating budget. Next slide. Cybersecurity, as I have mentioned through the CIP presentation on March 18th, we have seen through this past year an increase of vulnerable infrastructure, or at least an increase of sophistication for people hacking into systems, not just at the local government or national level, but we have seen the most sophisticated companies like Microsoft have vulnerabilities that they need to shore up in order to make sure that cybersecurity is reinforced. So looking and working with Mark Wittenberg, we're looking at acceleration strategies of improving cybersecurity framework compliance based on even higher risk to the organization, understanding that we have high risks as most organizations, but more importantly, understand an early warning signal to those high risk. And then just as important, keeping pace with the hackers, which is a very, very important work for our city. And we are looking at cybersecurity regulatory program and the IT security administrator for the privacy office for basically working the program that we are identifying as vulnerabilities. So the operating budget for that is about $350,000. That is a complement and bundled with the cybersecurity CIP. This accelerated target date for the cybersecurity is estimated to reach the target of 80% by 2023. Next slide. And finally, the right-of-way landscaping maintenance. We have heard very loud and clear from our community through various years of the importance of the aesthetics of our city, the quality of our landscaping along streets and sidewalks. And we have worked with the team in identifying acceleration strategies to replace plants and infrastructure. And also the most important is increasing the maintenance from 12 weeks to 2-week service. If you can think about plants and how the weather is increasingly warmer, the importance of that maintenance is crucial to the livelihood of our plants and sustainable, the investment to those assets. So focus on the maintenance, not necessarily acceleration, as we saw with our tree canopy. So operating budget supplemental requests that are recommended is about $861,000. That is the bundled companion piece to the CIP of $3.1 million. Next slide. And what you have here is what the team has identified as the acceleration target date of 2041 to reach for the landscaping maintenance. And once again, they don't recommend anything further than that because it really is focused on the acceleration of the maintaining of the plants. Next slide. And enrollment in early quality learning, achieving quality learning as we have seen. And this is probably perhaps an outlier because this operating budget supplemental has already been approved by the council for the Tempe pre-year 5 funding of 1.5 for the operating. Next slide. And then finally, as I mentioned early in the presentation, the initiative this year with strategic planning in our city has been really to take a deeper dive into our performance measures and identifying and memorializing the equity work that our city has already been doing for many years, but adding that language to the performance measures. So what you see before you is the 10 acceleration models that you've identified that we initiated with that equity piece in the language of the performance measures. And as we never move forward with the strategic plan without you approving the language of adding demographics to many of those performance measures. And that's what we are proposing tonight. Next slide. And with that, I'll turn it over back to Ken. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosa. Really quick question, Ken, before you come back on. I see Councilman Cubey's hand.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, sorry. It's about slide 13, specific to that, about the police score. I know along with Mayor Woods and Vice Mayor Keating, served on the Public Advisory Task Force. And I know the task force specifically issues about some of the questions that were asked related that derives that score. And they asked questions, the survey asked questions about local police services, enforcement of traffic laws, crime prevention, overall feeling of safety in neighborhoods and parks. And I asked if you've ever been assaulted or a victim of crime, have you ever been burglarized or a victim of a property crime? So they were kind of critical of those questions, and maybe that didn't really get to the police trust score or be as accurate as they thought. So just given that, I know obviously this year has passed, but we're going to be doing another community survey at the next one. Are we going to consider adapting those questions, reflecting the input of the Police Advisory Task Force?
It's perfect timing. Mayor, Council Member Mayor, Lauren Kuby, it's perfect timing. This week we were just discussing every year before the community survey takes place in July and August, we take the survey and we work with the departments in looking at the language. Absolutely, place and time. We have been working with our trusted community members, 23 of them through the Public Safety Task Force. Very appropriate if the chief is willing to move forward and make sure that we include our community and partners in that and looking at that language to improve it if necessary.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Excellent. Thank you, Councilmember Kuby. Thank you, Rosa. Ken?
Well, thank you, Mayor, and I hope you all are as excited as I am. I want to thank you and congratulate you one more time because this process is working. You gather information directly from the taxpayers. We gather information during public budget forums and give that to you. You pour over that information and you formulate what you think are gaps in our programs and services, and you identify what the outcomes are that you are wanting, and then our departments do a great job of addressing those through supplemental budget requests and through capital programs. So I get excited about this because I know it's working and we're getting to the point that you want us to, which is to address the things that you identify as important. So as Mark pointed out, you can give us any feedback tonight. We will be back on May 6th for another bite at the apple if you have any comments then. And then we'll come forward with the tentative budget adoption and the final budget adoption later. But we're looking for your input tonight on anything budget.
Thank you, Ken. All right, so a couple of things here. One, I know that Councilmember Adams wasn't able to attend this evening, but I know there were a couple of things that she had asked to talk about to see if we can actually address those. One of them was I know that she referenced a conversation about wanting to see if the community development deputy could be restored. This is, of course, in the operating budget, but I know she referenced that and thought that position should be unfrozen. I don't know if Shelley Seiler happens to be here. She might be able to address that, our interim community development director.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'll just say that Shelley is the appropriate person. That was submitted by the department as a recommended supplemental, ranked as 11 out of 13 requests that they made. It went to all of the departments, as all of our supplementals do, and they all scored them. It also came back there as not a high priority. Although all of the budget supplementals are important, it didn't come back as one of the highest ranking, and it is not proposed for funding tonight. And we can maybe hear more from Shelley Seiler about the rationale behind that proposal.
Excellent. That'd be great. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. As you know, I'm serving in the interim position for the Community Development Director. So we are moving forward right now in putting that position out for hiring. We feel it's important to have the permanent position in place and allow that director, to hire the deputy. And so we are proposing, again, we had ranked it a little bit lower from the other ones, knowing that the director would need to get up to speed prior to hiring that. So we will be proposing to unfreeze or restore that position for fiscal year 22-23, and it will be a priority for the department to hire that position.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you, Shelley. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And the only other item I had from Councilmember Adams was, maybe Naomi Farrell, our Human Services Director, is available to answer this one, She made a comment about, some of the concerns about adding additional FTEs in human services. And I believe one of her concerns was she thought we might be able to instead contract with an outside nonprofit of sorts to sort of keep costs down, but still kind of provide the same level of services we're trying to provide. So that was something that Councilmember Adams brought up to me that she wanted me to make sure that I read into the record and ask tonight. And I don't know if Naomi wants to comment on that.
Sure. Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is Naomi Farrell, Human Services Director. Yes, we definitely enjoy very strong partnerships with our nonprofits. As far as contracting out services with them or programs, we're always open to exploring. With that said, or if it's specific to our work with the homelessness, we have built an internal system that we feel brings very many advantages and benefits with low turnover in our staff, our outreach staff, as well as quality of data collection, and also the ability that they are available to us at any given time for them to go and address any situation out in the community.
Great. All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Right. So I guess those were the only two questions/comments from Councilmember Adams. I'm going to go to Councilmember Cubie, and I'll come back and make comments afterwards.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to have a discussion about the American Recovery Act funding. And when we last had a discussion about the CIP, there was a lot of last minute additions to the CIP, just how about this? And we just sort of threw this out, and there wasn't a lot of discussion, but we just threw a lot of additional items into the mix, and kind of expecting that we'd have to at some point make some harder decisions. But it seems to me that we're taking a lot, I may be wrong, so I just want to have a discussion about it. We're taking a lot of the COVID funding and we're moving it into the CIP. So can we talk about how that will balance? Because I know I think the community might expect to see a lot of resource needs and human services needs funded through the Recovery Act. So I just wanted to ask about that balance of that 23 million and how we will explain and sort of detail how that money got distributed to impact COVID relief.
Thank you, Councilmember. And so let me remind the public how that process went. When the City Council looked at the initial recommended capital program, we told them that we did not build into that initial recommendation the American Rescue Plan, or whatever they're calling the latest plan. It should be $46 million that the city gets. And when we found out what that amount was, we came back to the City Council. The City Council gave us 13 projects that they said they would like to see advanced in the capital program, in the CIP. We came back with a way to fit those 13 projects into the CIP, applying that funding. Some of the moves that we made were included moving the Family Advocacy Center from the red to the green. They included moving the restoration of a fire station that can't currently hold ambulance service, which directly serves the public, from the red to the green. It involved a lot of capital projects that are critical that we were able to fund. Now, we also know that the capital program is a 5-year plan and that those can change. So we thought it made sense that when the City Council said these 13 projects are important to us, we would like to move them up, that we applied that one-time funding to those one-time projects. That doesn't mean it's necessarily going to get spent on that. If the City Council, and there have been discussions of possibly acquiring some property or some existing building for homeless services. If the City Council wants to reconsider and move that up and move some other projects back, we can do that. So you're right, Councilmember, that the current year process that we go through for approving next year's budget for the capital program will be set in stone. The following 4 years are a plan that can be adjusted, but that's how we applied those funds to that planning process. And it was based on the 13 projects that the council raised. But it wasn't that money wasn't necessarily intended for COVID relief as much as it was saving. So there's a lot of funding going to various nonprofits through the state and other ways. This was money to the city to help address city shortfalls that were keeping us from providing good public services. That's my understanding.
Sure, no, I understand. And I know there have been cities across the country that have passed resolutions giving priorities for COVID relief funding for the American Rescue Plan. I said Recovery Act, sorry. So, you know, I understand. I do remember that CIP discussion. We had very serious and long discussions about some of the items. In the end, we were just sort of throwing things in. And with the understanding, I thought that we'd come back and try and evaluate, give priorities and hierarchies of some of those CIP needs in relation. At that point, we didn't really know about the funding for the detailed and what the Treasury Department would instruct is allowed under. That just came out, right? The Treasury guidelines just came out last week. So it just seems like there should be a more, you know, more complex discussion, I think, about that funding, and not be held to that original discussion with CIP where we were just kind of throwing a lot of things out there. And it just seems like we need to maybe balance at some point and have a deeper discussion. But maybe I'm alone in that summation.
Yeah, that is completely up to the city council how they want to readdress that funding. That we're willing to listen to any suggestions you have.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Cubey. I'm going to sort of go around the room here. I'm taking notes about this, but I'm going to go around the room and then come back to that. Anyone else have any comments or questions for Ken or Mark? All right. Well, I have one here, and I know, Ken, you know, you and I had a conversation about this, I believe yesterday. I know I had one with Stephen Methvin as well. So one of my things was, you know, kind of concerning our park security initiative, but also pertaining to homelessness. So I know, you know, initially when the proposal was put forth by Human Services, I believe, you know, we did the 6 different strategies that the council was looking at. And I know that based on that, there were, I believe, 12 additional FTEs that were proposed for that. But obviously, I know, you know, Ken, you and Mark and the team are trying to do everything you can to balance all of these requests for the different departments. And you guys have once again done exceptional work. You know, so I understand the need to obviously reduce the proposal from the 12 FTEs that were originally asked for to something that you think that we can monetarily actually accommodate. So I know what the 3 I believe that are up for approval right now. I think there's 1 person for Care 7, 1 park supervisor, and 1 Hope team member. And the only thing I want to make sure that we're doing, and so my only request would be, but I'll have to obviously kind of go around and see what council thinks about this. I would really like to see if we can fully fund the Hope team proposal, which is 2 additional FTEs for Hope. And here's really the reason why. You know, we're having a lot of conversations, you know, I know during the Public Safety Advisory Task Force, but there's been a lot of discussion about trying to shift a lot of the human services responsibilities away from the police department over to human services. And so if human services is going to begin to take on an even larger role in transitioning some of those duties, you know, my perspective is they probably still do need additional people, especially when it comes to homeless outreach. The other thing that I really do believe, though, when I first started back in July, you know, we had a real challenge even when it came to 6th Street Park. There were lots of tents and sleeping bags outside for people who were just looking for shelter. And, you know, when the council approved the original $450,000 in contingency funds to get 45 additional motel rooms, and then also let the Hope team go out there and begin to work with our unsheltered population, we saw that turn around within about a matter of 4 to 5 weeks. That it went from being multiple tents, multiple sleeping bags, multiple people outside, kind of exposed to the elements, just looking for a safe, stable place to be. They were immediately rapidly rehoused in motels and other much more stable options. And so, you know, from having the Hope team out there, I think we saw a real tangible impact. But when I look at, you know, even, you know, conversations I've had with residents about some of the challenges with encampments at the river bottom and Papago Park, and even a lot of our neighborhood park concerns, I really do feel the additional 2 FTE with the Hope team specifically will really help to have our community see true tangible benefits And so that, from my perspective, one, wanting to see the tangible benefits on behalf of our residents, wanting to serve our unsheltered population in the most humane way possible, but also shifting some of those resources away from the police department. I would request that we try to add those 2 FTE in for the Hope team to bring them up from 1 to 3. So that's my proposal, though.
Thank you, Mayor. And just to add on for your colleagues before they give their opinions, I'll say that you captured well the process as it went. So we asked the departments what it is they can use. They give us their best recommendations. If I could get everything, this is what I think would be reasonable. That original request was about 1.7 million for the park safety proposal. We went back and said, boy, we think we can squeeze $1 million in, and we did that. Then we went back to the departments and they clarified for us and said, you're killing us here. The 1 million that you're proposing won't even allow us to get the unarmed guards that serve a purpose in the park of helping the folks in the park. So we came back and raised that up to 1.3. So it started at 1.7, went down to $1 million based on department input, went back up to 1.3. And so that's where we are on that. And you're right, those positions that you recommended are not currently recommended for funding. So we're happy to hear if there's consensus to change that. We'll see what we can do to bring that back to you with a change.
Thank you, Ken. I appreciate that. I'm going to make one quick comment, then I'm going to go to Councilmember Arredondo Savage. The other thing is, I just, Naomi's presentation earlier and talking about one of the benefits of bringing more people onto her staff really is the accountability for the city council, for her, but also to our residents. The fact that we know that we can call upon the people who actually do work for us as members of the Hope team to pretty much help on a 24/7 basis when we see people who are truly in need. I think it provides a level of stability and a level of data collection that I do believe is helpful when it comes to measuring the effects of a lot of our outreach in that area. So with that said, I'll turn to Councilmember Arredondo Savage.
Great, thank you, Mayor. First, I just want to give a great shout out to Ken and Mark Day and your team for everything that you guys do. I mean, Mark, your department's so large, you guys have really crushed it this year. So thank you for everything that you do. But really, it comes right down to our leaders within the community and everybody really trying to work together to address the priorities from all the different departments and really making sure that we are aligning our strategic priorities with where we want to go. And I know it's hard and it's difficult, and everybody wants to advocate for what they know and what's close and passionate to them. But I really do think that you guys have done a phenomenal job. I love the process. I know it's painful sometimes, but I do think it works. And I certainly do appreciate having a process in place because it does completely make a difference. So I would just say, a couple things when it comes to the ARP funding. I'm very comfortable with where we are right now. I love the idea that we were able to get the funding directly. That is something that, we have advocated for, many of us that work with the National League of Cities, and getting funding directly coming to the cities. And I think that this was really a good effort for so many really across the country, and the importance of being able to do that. So I love how it's gone to a lot of our first responders, the immediate needs. So I'm very comfortable with that. I don't think we need to readdress that. I wouldn't shoot for that. I understand what the mayor is saying in regards to 2 more people in the outreach program. But I guess what I would say though is I think our Hope team and the PD have worked so well together, and I think that they've really done a lot of really great things and come a long way. And the 1.3 million is nothing to look aside, and I think everybody's put that together in good faith. I guess before I made any decisions or said that yes, I would move forward with that or I wouldn't, I certainly want to know what the outcome of adding 2 more people would be. And maybe a thought process could be is we look at where we are with the 3 new people. I mean, we were adding 3 new people, and I think that we're going to have some really great outcomes because of them. And let's see what that looks like in 6, 9, even maybe 9 months, just to see if there is a reason because we are missing the beat, or we're not filling in all the gaps. That I could definitely maybe open that up and take a look at that. But right now I'm really pleased with the process. I think you guys have done a really phenomenal job, and would like to move forward with what we have on the table. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Arredondo Savage. Anyone else? Councilmember Cubie.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I strongly support the addition of Hope team outreach workers, and respect human services in that recommendation. So I would add to that consensus if that consensus is building. And I do have a question. So the police substation was one of the CIP projects advanced that wasn't recommended before.
Yes. What we know that we have been collecting impact fees for that station in North Tempe, and that within 10 years of the beginning of the collection, we will have to start spending that. And I believe the collection started in 2017. So I think it's right at the end of this 5 years, we have to start spending some of that funding or start giving it back to the developers who contributed. So yes, that got it moved up a little bit.
Right. Right. The COVID relief funding is being used to move that up a bit, right? So, I mean.
Yes.
Yeah, that doesn't, I mean, I would like to look at revising that and moving it back to where it was before, before we knew the funding that was coming in through COVID relief. I just don't think, in some ways the optics aren't good at putting another police station in. We had it already planned in the CIP, but to use the COVID funding, federal funding to advance that particular project doesn't seem to be as appropriate as other movement like the Family Advocacy Center. You know, we've seen a doubling of aggravated domestic assault charges, not necessarily charges, excuse me, calls in Tempe. That makes sense as a COVID-related issue and spending, but that would be my interest in trying to move that back, the police station, to where staff had recommended earlier. Thank you.
Councilmember Kuby, just really quickly, can you repeat that last request just so I make sure I have that down for the record?
Yes, the police substation, which
okay.
Originally it's been moved up in the CIP with the justification that we have increased, funding from the federal government. So I was advocating that we move it where staff had previously recommended it and return it to that spot. I mean, I realize it's going to be built in the CIP in the next some odd years, but I don't think it should be moved up with COVID funding. Thank you.
Council member, thank you for that. And I'll see if you get consensus on that. But before we address just that one, I will say, I just want to remind you of what I said at the last meeting, which is after we went through that prioritization process and the city council gave us those 13 projects, we have heard that there may be a push to move some of our yard operations from their current to a new location. Those weren't planned in this 5-year CIP. We are now looking at that, and when we come, we don't know the cost, but when we come back from the cost, some things are going to have to move. We have dedicated all of the CIP funding we have in the current 5-year plan. So moving something into the 5-year plan will require moving something out of the 5-year plan. So that will be, if that's one of the things that's recommended, that's one of the things that could be considered. I think that's the direction we're heading.
Sure, that makes sense. You've made a really good point, Ken, that this has to be fluid. We're going to have needs that change from month to month. And so you made that point, that things aren't static. They have to be flexible and move. So thank you. I appreciate that nuance.
All right, great. Thank you, Councilmember Kuby. Next up, let's see. I believe I saw Vice Mayor Keating's hand, and then I see Vice Mayor Keating.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say I really appreciated Councilmember Savage's comments. He went through a process, and the process is nearly complete, and not trying to redo any or all of it at this time.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Vice Mayor Keating. I think what I couldn't hear a little bit, but I think he was just saying that he more or less wants to leave things the way that they are, and the process has been exhaustive up to this point, and doesn't believe that we should do any restructuring at this time. I believe that's, Vice Mayor, was that your comment?
That's correct. Sorry, my microphone is bad on my laptop.
No worries at all. No, just appreciate your input. Thank you. All right, next up, Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mayor. No, yeah, I would agree with our process and how it's been laid out right now. I know that, we can try to jockey in some stuff that absolutely have some need, but I hesitate to move, and I hesitate to move other things that we kind of agreed on as we go forward in the future. I know that my personal stance is making sure that the core values of the city are driving in the right location, making sure that our public works, our public safety, you know, our trash, the stuff that our residents, you know, the absolutely have to have our city to manage and function. To be the first and foremost thing that we take care of. And to the family advocacy, you know, person that we're going to be supporting, I know that with PD, they need support staff just to get the reports in a timely manner so that they can help these people out. As we fund this position, our support is not even there yet. So I probably will not be supporting anything additional unless we can get things to support that in particular. And I know that, you know, our city and we're trying to do some strategic things which will help our city in the future actually potentially receive more money. And with that more money in terms of revenue and retail and hotels and things like that, those strategic plans are gonna help those other outside programs that we do love and support, like the Hope Team. And to be honest with you, I will always first advocate Care 7 for their support, for their full-time support, not to be grant funded, and I would add for additional units that help our public safety crews, especially when it comes to mental health and homeless in a 911 situation. Those are the high impact people that absolutely need help, and with the density of the city going on. So with that said, I can advocate for a variety of things that actually I see as more as potentially as, depending on the person, as valuable need for the city. But at this point, I want to let the process ride. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Navarro. Really quickly, so it sounds like we've got consensus here, and I'll come back to Councilmember QB. I'm not sure if that was a residual hand, but it sounds like, so we got consensus here that we're going to leave things as they are with the budget. So therefore, you know, my request and Councilmember QB's will be pushed to the side for the moment. So, but no, we have consensus. Let's see. Ken, anything else on your end?
Mayor, I think we can avoid an agenda item on a future agenda if you want to give us consensus tonight. Like we told you, we are adding money to the TCC budget to make them whole for the shortfall in the billboard revenue. The billboard revenue is low because people aren't spending money during a pandemic. We only have that as one-time funding. If we want to, and this would be my recommendation, just add a recurring $100,000. So instead of $1 million plus billboard revenue, we're just giving them 1.1 million every year and remove that tie from that display panel and just increase that to 1.1 recurring. If you had consensus tonight, we can avoid a future council meeting agenda item to discuss that.
Okay, sounds good. I want to just clean up something I just said before. What I was trying to say was that nothing about being pushed to the side. I was just trying to say that we have consensus to leave the budget as is. I don't want any council members to think I was making any kind of other comments. So on that, but to go back to Ken, to your point, so yes, could council chime in on Ken's suggestion about making that a sort of more stable source of funding and not making it on the display panels? I'm more than happy to support that.
I agree, Ms.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember QB. Any other council members? Councilmember Garland?
I agree, Mayor.
Oh, thank you, Councilmember Navarro.
I support that.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Councilmember Arredondo Savage. All right, sounds good. Sounds like, Ken, you've got consensus to move forward on that item.
Great, thank you, Mayor.
Wonderful. And once again, Council, thank you for the discussion. Ken, Mark, Day, thank you for everything here. As we said, these are very, very difficult discussions every year, but the reality is, Ken, you and Mark do such an exceptional job of the entire budget team, and we know as council members we have to make very difficult decisions, but we are all doing, what we believe is in the best interest of the community, and I'm very confident we've got a very sound operating and capital budget, and I know the entire council believes the same. So excellent work as always.
Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Garland, before we go, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I don't remember who it was that you said that attached the links to the spreadsheet. And I just have to say that whoever that was is like the bomb. That was so incredible to be able to click on that and go right to the page that I was reviewing. So please send my thanks because that was incredible.
That's Benicia Benson. She does a great job.
Oh, she's amazing. Thank you, Benicia.
She's taken over for the 2 budget analysts that Mark is down right now.
Uh-oh. Well, tell her she's awesome. I'll tell her too. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Councilmember Garland. Ken, Mark, thanks again. Really appreciate it. Great job.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right. Next up, we have item 2C, which is the Parks and Recreation Master Plan draft. And I'm going to go ahead and call upon, looks like I see Sean Wagner.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me, Mr. Mayor?
I sure can.
Awesome. Thank you. We'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. Sean Wagner with the Parks and Recreation Division. And tonight I'm joined by Deputy Parks and Recreation Director Craig Keating, as well as our lead consultant on the Parks and Recreation Master Plan effort, Leslie Dornfield. And she's with Planet Communities. We do appreciate this opportunity to provide an update on our efforts. We are getting near the finish line with this plan, and from there we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. So while the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, it supports all of these strategic priorities, it really lives within the quality of life strategic priority. And with that, we focus on 2 of its performance measures, which is 3.16, which really hones in on the parks and recreation facilities. And this includes our recreation centers, our playgrounds, our athletic fields, courts, all of those types of things, not just our brick and mortar facilities, as well as our 3.17, which really drives to the heart of those community services, programs, and services. So tonight we're going to be requesting your feedback on the current draft of this Parks and Recreation Master Plan. Go ahead, next slide. So tonight's presentation, this is going to kind of show you the flow here. So we'll start out here with the plan background and then progress on through. And while there'll be an opportunity, as always, at the end of this presentation for comments and feedback, if there's something you'd like to ask as we're going through, please just get our attention and we'll be more than happy to stop and address it at that time. So appreciate that. Thank you. Next slide. So what is a Parks and Rec Master Plan? So as you can see here, we've kind of got some bullet points, but it's a 10-year planning document. And what's a 10-year planning document? It's our roadmap. It's our map of how we're going to get from here to there. And with that, it's going to help inform and shape the delivery of our programs and services. It's going to help, provide some guidance along the way, and as well as some policy direction. And, at the end of the day, we're going to have this this plan that's got these goals and achievable strategies. And as it's always important, they must remain flexible and responsive to our community. And that's built into this plan as well, too. And one of the key elements in the development and the creation of this plan was multiple community engagement opportunities, which is then going to go ahead and take us to our next slide. And again, here, we really did a tremendous job. And again, there are so many people to thank here that I'm not going to try to, because I'll inadvertently leave someone out, especially, internally with the city. This was definitely a team effort. But what we did as a team is we went out to the community and we engaged them. We listened to understand. And then taking those lessons learned, we brought those back and helped create this plan. We did this through community and stakeholder support and engagement, as well as you may recall early on in this process, we had an opt-in survey in which we received over 1,800 responses, which was great. We really just enjoyed getting in, and it provided a lot of detailed information and got this project started, got it started right. And it really gave us an opportunity to begin to dive into where we were going to go. And in addition to that, we've had a dozen focus groups. We've had multiple public meetings, which we were able to facilitate through Tempe Forum, which also allowed for online engagement and additional opportunities for that community feedback. Internally, we reached out to at least a dozen different boards and commissions. We've been in front of the council about 3 times now through work study sessions. And importantly on this, our Deputy Director, Craig Keating, he established this technical advisory committee, And this committee it's made up of staff from various city departments, as well as a couple of members from our Parks, Recreation, and Golf Advisory Board. And it really made sure that we were honing in not just on the Parks and Recreation piece of this project, which is the key driver in this plan, but how does it support those other efforts organizationally throughout the city. Next slide. All righty. So this, again, as I'd mentioned, it was a very comprehensive planning approach, and Leslie and her team at Planet did a tremendous job of keeping us on track, sorting through all the public information, the back and forth with Craig and I and the technical advisory team. We really do appreciate her guidance and expertise in this area. And it's the plan itself, it tells a story, and it's our opportunity to tell our story. And in that, we've organized and provided a context within this of a story map. And again, I want to commend Craig and Leslie and Stephanie Dietrich within our IT department as well too, just on coming up with this interactive plan and engagement. And the way this is organized, the way that this is laid out is, we've got 9 chapters here. So the first 3 really go into our introductory information. It goes over the plan format, how to use the plan, those sorts of things. The middle 3 chapters really highlight our background information and where we're at now in 2020. And so a terrific opportunity to really dive down in not only those planning efforts, but our city demographics and where we're at and what services, programs, facilities we currently have available to the public. And then these last 3 chapters are really where we have that opportunity to dream and also to use that information we've received to help guide us moving forward. So we really look at just different options, and Craig's really going to go into this over the next few slides, but we get into level of service, and it really just talks to this is where we're going to go as an organization, as Tempe, with our community. And with that, we're really excited to continue that vision. But for those that may not want to interact with the story map, and again, it's very user-friendly. It provides links to other city plans and efforts like the Climate Action Plan, the Recreation Needs Assessment, the Level of Service Study, quite a few, the transportation studies that are out there. All of that's included within that, and there are links to it, so I encourage you, if you get a chance, to check it out. But for those that want to engage a little differently, we still do have an opportunity for a printable PDF, which allows folks to do a more traditional approach to the plan as well. So again, I really just have appreciated this opportunity to be involved with this, excited about where we're at. And I'll hand it over to Craig because he's really got some, the yeoman's work with this and the level of service and how we're going to finish out the effort now. Craig?
Great. Thanks, Sean. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Craig Keating, Deputy Community Services Director with the Parks and Recreation. As Sean mentioned, we're going to spend the majority of our time for the rest of this presentation to briefly run through chapters 7 and 8. We're going to go back to something we actually spent some time in our last work study, which was the level of service analysis. We have provided an updated level of service analysis recommendations. And then we're going to move on specifically to our plan principles and strategies. How do we, from a larger perspective of the next 10 years, where are we headed, focusing on 4 key terms. So as we go through the updated level of service analysis, this was our opportunity to really keep up with population increase as it relates to specific amenities and facilities within the system. We have highlighted 7 of the 16 different amenities that Leslie and her team, working in conjunction with our core team and the Technical Advisory Committee, looked at some benchmark jurisdictions. We had an opportunity to present back last year on some level of service recommendations. I've highlighted pickleball courts just to show how the flow of this level of service recommendations actually fits. And these 7 that we've highlighted here are ones that we've recommended to increase the level of service. Now, there are going to be 6 that we've not recommended to increase the level of service. We're going to see some increase in amenities just as population increases, but we have recommended that 3 of the 16 would be lowered, though we're not going to be removing any amenities. We recognize that's certainly an important thing for us to really highlight at this point. So looking at facilities, pickleball court is highlighted. We currently have 12, the second column, which is a ratio of 0.62 per 10,000. We're bumping that up to an even 1 per 10,000. Therefore, over the next decade, we should have 21 total courts at the end of this decade season for this planning effort, which means we will need to add 9 courts. Now, this is an opportunity for us as we seek input. A really key piece that we want to engage with mayor and council just to make sure that we've got this right. We have the full level of service analysis table within the packet materials, but we think it's an important time for us just to pause here for a sec, not just on the level of service to make sure that we've got it right, but also to go back and revisit the April 8th work study session related to Clark Park. This was something we were given some direction to consider adding pickleball courts as part of the improvements over at Clark Park. What we would like to do is just ask for a pause on that for now, because as we have this list of amenities that we'll be adding over the next 10 years, one of the key recommendations that we'll mention later under the inclusion guiding principle is an opportunity for an amenity equity study as well as a programming equity study, where we look at all of these amenity needs, where we're going to add them over the next 10 years from coming from an equity lens, so that we make sure that we look at the entire system. We look at information that really would help us actually plan where these amenities are going to go over this period. And this is an opportunity for us to say, thank you for that direction. We would love, if there's an opportunity and there's consensus from council, to pause that, to come back at the end of the equity study in the next year or so and say, this is really what we're looking at for these amenities. Certainly have Clark on the table to consider that, but would love to report back, understanding that we are recommending a limited amount of amenities, and each of these amenities do certainly have not just locational implications, but also some cost implications. So before we move on to the guiding principles, would love to just pause here to see if that's something that we could report back on rather than include at this point within Clark, but certainly the possibility is there for in the future. And then just to make sure on the second side that we have this table right at this point. So would love to pause here if it seems appropriate. And if not, I'm happy to move on. All right.
So Craig, so are you asking for council consensus to put that on pause? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, if we could. Thank you for clarifying that. Absolutely. We believe that it's, we've identified that we would like to add 9 pickleball courts over the next 10 years, but we would like to look at the entire system, not saying that Clark wouldn't be a good fit for that, but we would love to report back on that after our equity study is done.
Okay. I don't know how the process works, so we need to have the mayor ask, or I'm fine with that.
I'm fine with that too, Mayor. Thank you, Dory,
I'm fine with that, Mayor.
Yep, thank you.
Mayor, we can certainly come back to this at the end of the presentation as well. So, all right.
Move with the mayor.
Yep. Oh, yes. I'm sorry.
I was just wondering if the mayor's still on.
Yep, I'm still here.
Okay, thanks.
Great.
And so that was me and Robin and Joel so far for consensus on that, I think.
Yep.
Yes, and me.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. We have consensus. Yep. Got it.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Councilmember Garland, for clarifying that one. All right, moving on. Another key component as we look now moving into Chapter 8 is really identifying strategies for the implementation of the plan. And what we wanted to do, as other key planning efforts have within the city, is really focus on guiding principles. These are terms that are going to help really ground us as a division as we look forward for the next 10 years. And again, working in conjunction with a technical advisory committee, some key departmental contacts, and our Parks Board, we have landed on 4 key terms that we believe flow out of the council's strategic priorities: inclusion, resilience, strategic, and sustainability. We're going to run through each of those briefly with the next 4 slides. And I would like to start off with inclusion and just talk through how this slide is set up here. Inclusion is the identified principle. The blue box is what it means, the definition of it for Parks and Recreation. We believe that inclusion within Parks and Recreation is really focusing on access and opportunity. The bottom left of each slide for these principles focuses on what it means for Parks and Recreation. These are our goals. So an inclusive Parks and Recreation system for Tempe, the facilities and programs would see connections and integration within the community, focused on the needs of the entire diverse community, would be welcoming and designed for all, looking at equitable distribution, as we referenced on the previous slide, a focus on accessibility, and then really looking at the Parks and Recreation system and programs as an opportunity for us to really support and provide connections through the city. So we see the Parks and Recreation system and that network really helping to look like this in the next 10 years. And some key strategies things that we'll continue to do or that we'll take up in the near and midterm to make sure that we accomplish those goals would be to focus on implementation of the city's ADA transition plan, something that we have been working on with our CIP program. What can we do to take inclusive play to the next level with the design and construction of a fully inclusive play area within a regional park? We know that we have some improvements we need to make at Kiwanis on the north side playground. This seems like a wonderful opportunity for us to do so. And then third, working with a social justice entity. We have a great partnership with Shauna Warner and her team, but we believe there's an opportunity to really engage on a different level, to continue the great work that we started with her team on community engagement. And then, as I mentioned previously, conducting and implementing a park and program equity study. So we do want to look at those amenities, but we also want to focus on the program offerings that we have as well. Our second guiding principle is resilience. This is really making sure, and this is born out of the last year. At the last council work study session, we were asked to slow down a bit and really make sure that we were thinking through the impacts of 2020. And this resilience is a key guiding principle focused on environmental, societal, and health events. What can Parks and Recreation do to make sure that Tempe is a thriving community? Looking at building connections, integration within the community, looking at helping with extreme heat and drought, well-maintained, safe and clean park spaces, and then just the ability to physically withstand increased use, flooding, and any unforeseen events. And we see some key strategies with, you know, as Rosa mentioned earlier, the implementation of the Urban Forest Master Plan is both a planting and a maintenance responsibility that we have. Utilizing parks and recreation sites for key gathering hubs for emergency management, something that we've been able to work through these past few years, and then additional partnerships, continuing to partner with other departments like sustainability, engineering, and transportation on green infrastructure, LID projects, other resilience efforts that we can be key partners, especially since we're managing space within the city. Moving on to the third strategic or guiding principle, looking at strategic here. This is our opportunity for flexibility and continuous improvement. Looking at a system that is supported by the community, looks at expanding what we offer through partnerships, and then providing a key and critical link to the city's 20-minute city network. Something as we work through the transportation team, with the transportation team, was a really key opportunity for us to be strategic as a department within multiple departments and organizations. So some near midterm strategies are partnership with other departments in addressing the impacts of homelessness. Again, focused on equitable and inclusive engagement, developing a parks proactive volunteer program, seeing how we can provide additional opportunities to be supported by the community. We know there's a great need out there. And then looking at periodically conducting program life cycle analysis, making sure that we're making those midstream adjustments in the program offerings that we have. And then finally, a focus on sustainability really looks at those social, economic, and environmental impacts. We recognize that so many of these guiding principles do cross over with one another, but this really is an opportunity for Parks and Recreation to be that restorative force within the community, in the spaces and the programs that we offer. Some key strategies here. Again, a focus on the implementation of the Urban Forestry Master Plan with an emphasis on equity, as was mentioned earlier. Exploring opportunities as we have parking spaces and opportunities for people to be in some of our areas to install EV chargers, looking at piloting site certifications, which is the landscape version of LEED certification. And again, an opportunity to coordinate with the city's 20-minute city efforts. So those are the 4 key guiding principles that we have for the plan and some key strategies in implementation. A quick review of the timeline. As Sean mentioned, we've had a busy March and April with a dozen boards and commission presentations, some wonderful input, questions, opportunities to engage at a really broad level with our community. There was a public meeting in March. We also had an online survey period of almost a month where we received some wonderful comments. We appreciate the opportunity to provide, to get some feedback and input from the council here tonight. We will take and consider and consolidate all of those comments and the input that we have received over the past 2 months, integrate it into a finalized plan that we will then bring back to Mayor and Council for formal plan adoption, we hope, before the end of the fiscal year. And we're very fortunate to receive this input so far. One of the key things that has come out is that these 9 chapters are wonderful. The story map is a wonderful format. We would love an executive summary is what we're hearing from a lot of people. And that's really what we would love to provide just in some of the key updates that we have. So at this time ends our presentation. Sean and I would be happy to take any questions and input. And we do have Leslie on the line as well, who can help provide additional background, but really appreciate the opportunity for this presentation here tonight.
Excellent. Craig, Sean, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. Honestly, I don't have any questions other than, I think this is amazing. I think you guys did an exceptional job here. I mean, this is a real home run presentation from my standpoint. So just wanted to just chime in to give you kudos for everything. And honestly, no questions on my end, but I'm going to go to Councilmember Arredondo Savage, then Councilmember Cubie.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I 100% agree with you, Mayor. I thought this was fabulous. It's super thorough, and it's really, really easy to understand. So I think it's going to be good for the community as we move forward to give everybody an idea of what the vision is and what to expect. So you guys did a phenomenal job, and like you always do. So I just want to say thank you. I'm really grateful for the work and the energy and the effort that you've put into this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Arredondo Savage. Next up, Councilmember Cubie.
Thanks, Craig. I have no questions, but just wanted to compliment you and staff. I've attended many of the presentations, and there's been such a thorough engagement with the public. And it's so rewarding and gratifying to see sustainability and resilience and inclusion and equity principles and practices incorporated into this plan, and to see all of the work done as well by the climate action work and all the equity work from Rosa's office and the work done by the Office of Sustainability, all the integration. It just seems like we're really maturing in that way, the way we see equity and inclusion and diversity, and we're seeing it in every bit of our staff and all of our planning. So I just want to commend you for all of that, and I'm really excited for the plan to be enacted.
Thank you, Councilmember Cubie. Next up, Councilmember Garland.
Hi, thank you, Mayor. I wanted to just echo the same thing that my council colleague says. I would have said I'm really impressed with this that you put together for us. And just as Councilmember Cubie just said, I kept going back to page 8 of slide 8, where it talks about just what Councilmember Cubie said about the inclusion, resiliency, strategic, and sustainability. I love that you have incorporated all of that into this program and into this plan. And I absolutely love the outreach that you've done to the community. You guys have done a great job. I'm so proud of you. Thank you so very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilmember Garland. Any other council members, comments or questions? All right, hearing none, once again, thank you so much for everything. Really amazing presentation, and you have the consensus to move forward.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council.
Great.
Thank you.
All right, next up we have item 2D, which is future agenda items. Council members may request that an agenda item be added to a future issue review session. And in accordance with the open meeting law, there should be no discussion on the item other than to clarify the request. Do any members of council have anything they'd like to add for future agenda items? All right, hearing none. The next item on the agenda is the call to the audience for committee of the whole items listed under section 4. There are no items at this time, but we see call the audience number 3. I know we have, I think Kendon is still on. Is that correct, Madam Clerk?
This is Alex, Mayor,
Yes.
and I can answer on behalf of Carla. Yes, Kendon is still on the line.
Perfect. All right, then we can go ahead and queue him up, and he can go whenever he's ready.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you all. I apologize. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Thank you all. I apologize. I was having technical difficulties and wasn't able to get on when you all were making the original call. So first of all, thank you and good evening, Mayor and Council. And for those of you who don't know me on the call, my name is Kenan Young. I'm the chair of your Sustainability Commission. And I want to thank you for allowing me to speak in front of you. Today, 51 years ago, 20 million people, which was about 10% of the country's population at that time, mobilized a call for greater protections of our planet. Since then, the movement has grown to an international observance called Earth Day. Protecting our Earth is important to the Tempe community. This can be seen in the recent survey asking residents how the city should spend its limited resources, and 35% of those votes were casted towards sustainability and climate action priorities. And the additional funding that you all have put towards climate neutrality will strengthen Tempe's ability to improve single-family waste diversion, make meaningful progress in our greenhouse gas emissions, create high-functioning buildings, infrastructure, and services, and increase our shade canopy. And those are the types of transformational change that our world needs. It requires action at all levels, from business and investment to city and national government. And the last time I came before you, I presented a history of, or a pattern of inaction, and asked that we as a city hold each other accountable for our respective roles in this environmental crisis. And I am incredibly encouraged to see this council work towards answering that call. So, and I thank you for that. Each Earth Day, every Earth Day can drive a year of energy, enthusiasm, and a commitment to create a new plan of action for our planet. Your voice and your actions today are united with millions of others around the world and felt by future generations. We appreciate the additional CIP investments that were made today, especially towards the climate neutrality ones. It is a step in the right direction. It demonstrates this council's values and begins to live up to our residents' expectations. I look forward to the day that sustainability gets 100% of its asks, but until then, you have the commitment of the Sustainability Commission to continue to partner with this council and city staff to achieve a sustainable future. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Kendon. Really appreciate it. Next up, item number 4, committee of the whole items. There are none. Item number 5, mayor's announcements. I don't have any. Mr. Manager, do you have any announcements?
None tonight, thank you.
Great. Well, with that said, the next meeting date is Thursday, May 6th, 2021, and we are adjourned at 6:03 p.m. Thank you so much.